the keys are to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Time for Stock Up 49ers, because 49ers depth appears to be getting better. And this has been one of the question marks kind of headlining the offseason, is how deep was this San Francisco 49ers roster going to be? They were going to have to count on some retreads. They're going to have to count on some young players, whether that is second, third year guys, to step up into roles maybe that they haven't been successful at in the past. And then, of course, you've got the rookies who are coming in, and then you're dealing with all these injuries on top of that. That's making it a little bit more difficult to see how deep this roster really is. It starts appearing very thin. But in this game versus the Raiders, the 49ers had some key contributors step up and put themselves in position to not only succeed for this football team, but potentially be able to add and help during the regular season as well. And ultimately, that's what you're looking for when you're going through training camp and preseason. The guys that are going to stick, the guys that are going to make the 53-man roster, as Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch like to say, the guys made of the right stuff. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this one, is I thought that there were some key players on offense, defense, and special teams that stepped up and maybe even separated themselves from some of the other players that are behind them. And that's ultimately the name of the game in the preseason, is get yourself on the roster, but create separation so there's no question marks. And of course, injuries are going to complicate things at certain positions, but I thought that this was at least a good step forward. And one thing that I've been talking about over the last couple weeks is consistency. And so you had guys in week 1 that played really well, and then it got to week 2 and they got into a different matchup or a different situation, and they might have struggled a little bit. And that's to be expected, especially with some of the young players. But what are they going to look like when it comes to the Chargers? Are they going to be able to step up and have another pretty good performance? That's going to be one of the question marks. Then you got key veterans, guys like Chase Lucas, right, that are stepping up, and they're not just making plays, but they're being consistent with their playmaking. That's how you lock up a 53-man roster spot. So this is going to be a fun one where we get into these players that are setting themselves up nice, who played a lot better against the Raiders than they did last week, or showed consistency that they are being able to stack games and show good film, and that's going to impress the coaching staff and give them a chance to make this roster. So please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening to audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe, please give it a 5-star rating. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the title sponsor of 49ers Cutback. If you're going to bet with FanDuel. The 49ers are favored to win the West at plus 160. The Rams are at plus 200. So if you want to bet on the 49ers to win the division, it's there. 49ers odds of winning the Super Bowl 19-1. You can find all that on FanDuel. Go check it out. Now let's talk about these stock up 49ers, and I'm going to start with an interesting one, because if you listen to the channel a lot, you know one of my big concerns is tight end 3. You look at George Kittle, you're set. You look at Luke Farrell, and I thought Luke Farrell kind of raised his stock in this game as well. Had a couple really good blocks. You see the way that he was able to run the route across the middle, drags across, gets the ball, makes a little oop-de-doop move, makes the guy miss, and gets almost to the goal line. I thought it was a nice game from Luke Farrell in a very limited role. They're not asking him to do a lot right now because they have other guys they want to see play. So I thought Luke Farrell's stock is up, but I don't want to talk about him because I kind of expect Luke Farrell to do this, right? Make a couple of catches here and there, block pretty well, and I think that he's going to do a good job for the 49ers, and we're going to have lots of time to talk about Farrell because he's a shoo-in, on this roster and to make an impact. 12 personnel, 22 personnel, he's going to be on the field as a second tight end next to George Kittle. He's got the Charlie Warner role. But I thought it was a really big performance for Jake Tunges. And I had talked about Jake Tunges after the week 1 preseason matchup versus the Denver Broncos, that I felt that he did some things that kind of pushed him in a positive direction. He was out there, he made a couple of key catches. One of those down low to the ground. The other one where he got the ball thrown behind him and had to make a contested catch, take a little bit of contact, still came up with it. He was competing when it came to blocking. And I say competing because it wasn't always good. Sometimes it was good. Sometimes it was bad. It was a little inconsistent with the blocking. They're asking Jake Tunges to do a lot. If you look at him, he's lined up out wide. He's lined up on, in line. He's been lined up off ball and then moved tight end spot. He's been lined up at fullback. They've moved Tunges around in kind of the Ross Dwelley role that Dwelley held in 2018, 2019 as tight end 2 for George Kittle. Well, Jake Tunges really stepped up. Now, he did have a bad holding call, and the reason he had a bad holding call, it was he got a little bit lazy with his technique, and he allowed that defender to kind of slip out the back door. He just reached out and grabbed his shoulder, hoped nobody would see it, nobody would call it. But whenever you are running out on the edge, a lot more eyes are on it from those back judge, and they saw it, and they called the penalty. So that was unfortunate for Jake Tunges. But there was a lot to like in this game, whether it was the big catch that he made in the fourth quarter on fourth down to get the first down, diving out, stretching, getting the first down. That was huge. Or some of the key blocks that he made to get running backs out into the open. There's one out on the left side on a toss play. He comes through and absolutely walls off a defender and allows Jeff Wilson Jr. to navigate through the holes and find a nice running lane to get 9 yards on the play. So it was a great performance from Jake Tunges. It led me to tweet that I believe Jake Tunges is now on track to be tight end 3, and he might be the guy that makes it. And this is an interesting development because it was before the preseason, before training camp, in fact. I thought the 49ers might elect to just go 2 tight ends on their active 53-man roster when they released their first 53, so that way they could keep other players at key positions, because I didn't feel that Jake Tunges or Braden Willis or Ross Dwelley had really separated themselves and made themselves a player that you couldn't possibly do without. And I think that Tunges hasn't made himself a player that you can't do without, but I think he's made himself a player that you're interested in. You're intrigued about his potential. He's just going into year 3. So this is a young guy still developing, and I think that there's a lot there for Tunges. And I'm starting to feel more comfortable with him being tight end 3 because you're getting some consistency in blocking, but you're also getting some consistency in receiving. And one of the big elements to that tight end position is those 1 or 2 games when George Kittle's out. And hopefully there's none of those games, right? Kittle works on his body a lot, but it has been a normal part of Kittle's career that he misses a couple of games. You have to have a receiving threat. And I don't think Luke Farrell is enough of a receiving threat to put pressure on a defense. I think he's going to catch a ball here and there, and he'll be able to move the sticks occasionally, maybe a red zone touchdown here or there. And that's exactly what you're looking for. A little bit upside in the receiving game from what you had with Charlie Warner, and hopefully blocking close to Charlie Warner. It's going to be tough. Charlie Warner is pretty good. But I think that there's an element there to what he can add. But then with your third tight end, it had to be somebody that could make some plays when it came to catching the football. And right now, I think Jake Tunges is separating himself from Braden Willis, which is interesting because, during training camp, Braden Willis was the one that was kind of separating from Tunges, and then all of a sudden, here came Tunges back. These are those ebbs and flows of training camp in the preseason, and also ebbs and flows of the roster movement is you've got to consistently be good. And I think Tunges over the last 3 weeks has really became a player that's been more consistent and a better tight end for this football team. So I think stock up Jake Tunges and what he's been able to do, and I think he is going to be tight end 3. I would not be surprised to see him make the 53-man roster now. I think he's put enough good film out there that there are some tight end needy teams around this league that would be willing to take him and put them as their third tight end. So I think Jake Tunges, he made the 53-man roster last year in a little bit of a surprise. I think he makes it this year as well. So Tunges, my first guy, stock up 49ers. My second guy is a player that I think is a lot of fun because he's very talented, and that's Spencer Burford. And Spencer Burford is a guy that's going back to playing tackle the way he did at UTSA when he was in college. And the 49ers drafted him with the thought process of putting him at offensive guard, and it really was a very smooth transition for Spencer Burford early on in his career. he came in and he split reps with Daniel Brunskill at right guard, but he played a lot his rookie season and looked really, really good. In fact, we were talking about Spencer Burford in year 2. A lot of the ways we were talking about Dominic Pooney coming out of his rookie season was Burford was a guy that could push to be a Pro Bowl type player. That's how good he was. Now, we know it didn't go that way, and it can't always go that direction. So Spencer Burford struggled a little bit over the last couple years, and he's kind of gotten moved now where Chris Foerster's trying to give him one more shot. And we've seen this work for Jalen Moore. Jalen Moore played tackle, was inconsistent early in his career, and then he became a very stable swing tackle for the 49ers. And I know 49ers normally go, tackle, left tackle, right tackle when they're building their roster, but they call it the swing tackle, which is that next guy in. And that's really what Spencer Burford's trying to become. In week 1 of the preseason against the Broncos, he really struggled at times. And it wasn't all bad, but there was some inconsistencies, especially dealing with the speed rusher and Nick Bonito. That was a problem for him. But I felt like this week against the Raiders, he really settled in. Now, it's a little bit different with who you're going against. They don't have anyone that was lining up against him. They were playing, their main guys on the other side going against Colton McKivitz, but they didn't really go after him, hugely. And I thought that he held up pretty well. Spencer Burford only gave up 1 pressure in this game. I think that is a significant improvement. We saw him moving in the run game. The blocking was getting a little bit more effortless as he's kind of figuring out the landmarks and where he's supposed to aim and what he's supposed to do. And I thought that he cleaned up a lot of things. Now, it's definitely not perfect. It's definitely a work in progress. But I thought for the first time we saw Spencer Burford, and it was nothing to do with just conversation, right? Because a lot of people have been saying that Spencer Burford needed to move to tackle without there being any legitimate evidence to explain why. And we know that the roster construction is the reason why now. And I thought for the first time we saw a player that showed the ability to potentially do that. Now, there's still going to be some weaknesses in his game. There's some things he has to overcome and the footwork and things like that. But I thought it was a step in the right direction. And when you're talking about a backup offensive tackle in the NFL, I thought Spencer Burford looked like a backup offensive tackle in the NFL. And I think that's a good sign because there were huge question marks after week 1 about if they had depth at offensive tackle. And I've had concerns about Spencer Burford's feet. I thought that he did a pretty good job. Now, we'll see what happens when he goes against, those speed rushers again. Will he suffer the same fate that he had with Nick Bonito? That's a question mark. But now we just want to see Spencer Burford stack upon this. Good performance. Let's get a good performance against the Chargers, because the one thing that Chris Foerster has said about Spencer Burford during his time with the 49ers is he needs to be more consistent. Spencer Burford is one of the most talented of the 49ers offensive linemen. When you look top to bottom, athleticism, size, speed, aggressiveness, he's one of the most talented, and that's come straight from Chris Foerster's mouth. But he's been inconsistent. If all of a sudden he can lock in with consistency and be a guy the 49ers can count on as that backup offensive tackle to Trent Williams, which George Kittle usually misses a couple games, so does Trent Williams, and we'd love for Trent to be able to line up and play the whole season, but you just don't know if you can count on that. So Spencer Burford playing well is going to be one of the key elements, and I thought it was a stock-up game for him. I'm hoping that next week we could talk about Spencer Burford, replicated that performance, or he got a little bit better, and I think that's the goal for Spencer Burford. So stock up, and it's good to talk about an offensive lineman and stock up, and an offensive lineman we haven't really talked about in a positive direction in a little while. So Spencer Burford, I thought, did a really good job. Well, let's talk about Marquise Siegel. And the reason I want to talk about Siegel is, I know we talked about him a lot last week, was he stacked upon that good performance. And he wasn't a guy that maybe didn't do well in week 1 and they came back in week 2 and stepped it up. This is a guy that's just continuing the ascension. Last week, he put down what he could do. He was flying around, making tackles. He had a couple of misses here and there, but you could just see it. He was scratching the surface of his potential. And then this week, he was going to get the opportunity to go out there and start next to Jair Brown. And I think all Marquise Siegel did was cement the fact that he's a very, very successful player. So Siegel's tackling is probably the thing that needs to be highlighted the most. He has been phenomenal. The breakdown, the execution, form tackling 101 from Marcus Siegel. And that's ultimately what you're looking for from that safety position. Yes, they have to be able to cover. Yes, they have to, be able to make the proper reads when it comes to coverages and reading the quarterback's eyes and being there when the ball gets there. All that stuff matters. But tackling is a big element to being a successful safety, because not only are you expected to tackle wide receivers in open field, you're also expected to come up in the run game and make plays and square up running backs, which he's been doing at a high level. I think Marquise Siegel has really elevated his game since coming into the NFL. And we had heard whispers about Marquise Siegel's potential and how he was a quick learner when it came to football. But you never know how quickly that's going to translate from the meeting room to the field. It is definitely there. And, it's interesting because I did an episode earlier in the offseason where I talked about the players that the 49ers drafted and how they somewhat look or feel like other players they had in the past, right? Their attributes were the same. And I kept saying Marquise Siegel reminded me of Jimmy Ward, not as far as body type or anything like that, but skill set. A guy that could walk up and cover a wide receiver in the slot, could come up and stop the run, could still play the deep third. And he's got all that. And then it's funny because they say, comes from the coaches that, hey, yeah, he reminds us his skill set of Jimmy Ward. And I think that's exactly why they drafted him, right? That's the kind of player that worked really well for the system. Let's get somebody that's similar. He's not going to be the same player, but he's got a similar skill set that we can use in our defense. I think Marquise Siegel's done a great job. So I'm excited to see what Siegel does next week, because I think he actually got better from week one. Week 1 to week 2, it was good. Now he's just got to trust his eyes a little bit more. I think there was a couple of times he could have made plays on the football when the ball was thrown, near him, and he was just a little bit hesitant, and that's okay. He's a little bit hesitant right now. He's trying to make all the right plays. He doesn't want to get beat, and that's understandable. But I think as he gets more comfortable, he's going to realize what's going on, what he's seeing scheme-wise, and he's going to pull the trigger and get there. And I think he's going to be an exciting prospect, moving forward. Can he start? I don't know. I think it's really close right now. I think Jason Pennick is going to start at safety, and then after that, there's an opening. It could be Jair Brown, who his game was a little up and down. I know he's catching a lot of heat for the Brock Bowers catch. I thought he was in great coverage. I thought he did a really good job turning and running with him. He just didn't finish. And that's one of the keys. You have to be able to finish. But I think there's some positives to take out of that too. Hey, Jair, you were in the right spot. You did the right things. Just next time, don't go down. You've got to be able to high point that football and come away with an interception or knock that ball away. So I think that Jair Brown has left the door open enough, whether that's injuries or with some of the inconsistent play, that Marquise Siegel's got a shot to step in and start day one, which is going to be a tough task, but he's done a pretty good job, and he is a better tackler than Jair Brown. So there are definitely some momentum swings in Marquise Siegel's direction to potentially start. I don't know when Richie Grant is going to be back and whether he can figure into this competition either. So 49ers have some decisions to make, and I think Marquise Siegel is making it tougher when it comes to who's going to start. But you love to see the young rookie stepping up and making plays. Another young rookie who I thought improved vastly from week 1 was Nick Martin. And you're still going to see the rookie mistakes when you turn on the All-22 film. It's just the way it is. There are still times he's a little bit too eager. He comes up and flies up out of control. Marquise Siegel breaks down, makes tackles. Nick Martin does not break down. Right now, Nick Martin knows one speed. When Robert Saleh says all gas, no brakes, he literally is taking it literally. I mean, that's what Nick Martin's doing. All gas, no brakes. He's flying around, and that's why when you see him in key situations, it's working out swimmingly, right? If he's in man coverage, he's got one responsibility. Go cover that guy in man. He does a good job. He flies over, makes a tackle out in the flat. When he's got one responsibility, go sack the quarterback on a blitz. You can do that. One responsibility. He doesn't have to think, just go. Right now, that's where Nick Martin is excelling the most. Now, when he has to get into a read situation, when he's reading where the run play's going or pass run and getting into his drops and having to consider guys coming in and out of his zone, it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more convoluted. Sometimes he figures it out and he looks like $1,000,000 and he blows it up. And then there's sometimes where it's a little bit late. It's a little bit slow. And we can always look at that and say, hey, this is a guy that's learning the system and he's learning what the read keys are. He's learning what the offense is going to do that's going to determine where he goes. And so you give him a little bit of leeway as he's learning how to read NFL offenses and figure out in this defense where he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to do. And because he's thinking, that slows down his play just a little bit. Now, once he figures it out, athleticism through the roof. Flies around and make plays. But I would say Nick Martin has definitely improved from week 1 to week 2. And that's all you can ask from a young player is if it's not going well in week 1, make it better in week 2. And if he can continue that trajectory in week 3 against the Chargers and just be a little bit better. Now less out of control when you're making tackles, break it down. That's a huge change in the positive direction. Maybe get a drop in the right position when you're in zone coverage. Do it more consistently. You did it right, 2 times in a row, and then you had a mess up in the game. Now do it right 3 times in a row. And I think that's one of the keys to Nick Martin's success. But I thought it was a much, improved Nick Martin, and I think I'm feeling very confident about his development. Is he going to get out there and step up and be a starting linebacker for the 49ers in year 1? No, he's not. But is he going to eventually be able to help this team? Yes. And once it clicks, and it could be during the middle of the season, this guy's going to be able to help the team if there's an injury or something else. But I got to talk about Tatum Bethune as well, his running mate. I think Tatum Bethune has put himself in a position to challenge Luke Gifford for Sam linebacker, and he might not win that position. But his play has been so good. The way that he's reading, how comfortable he looks in his zone drops, how he looks going sideline to sideline, his tackling. Tatum Bethune looks like a very competent NFL linebacker. And I think there's still more upside there. But I thought he built on week 1's preseason performance and came back in week 2 and was just as good or better. And I think that consistency is going to be something that gets the 49ers' attention. Now, I think Luke Gifford is leading in the clubhouse to be the starting Sam linebacker. But I think Tatum Bethune's not out of this thing at all. The way that he's played, he's put himself in prime position to compete for Sam linebacker. What we do know is Tatum Bethune has earned a spot on this roster. If there was any question marks about him making the 53, I think they're over. That's how good he's played. And so you're seeing good young linebacker play, whether that's the rookie in Nick Martin or a second-year man in Tatum Bethune. And now all of a sudden that linebacker room is looking very deep. And you've got the young guy stepping up, and then you've got Chaz Surratt, who comes in. This is his preseason debut. And we know that Robert Saleh loved him from his time with the New York Jets. But what were you going to get out of Chaz? He's a guy that can play all 3 linebacker spots, which that versatility is much valued. You have an injury, he can go play Will, he can play Sam, he can play Mike, and he is the 3rd Mike right now. I think he was starting to separate himself because you had questions about who was going to be that 6th linebacker for the 49ers. And we knew Chaz Surratt had a lot of special teams advantages to him, and Brant Boyer had him as a special teams player over the last several years. But was that going to translate onto the defensive side of the ball where he had showed promise, but had never really elevated his game? Well, the athleticism's there, but also the tackling was there. He graded out as the best tackler in the 49ers defense, and he had 5 tackles in this game. I thought he did a really good job of stepping up when he got in there. And yes, he was going against the 3rd team offense, and that's okay. You play against the players you play against, but the technique, the finish was very good for Chaz Surratt. And so I think he's putting himself in a position where the 49ers are probably, looking to move on from, Curtis Robinson, which is tough. I think Curtis Robinson is still in the mix, but I think Surratt's a little bit better special teams player and it's got a little bit more juice when it comes to defense. So I think Curtis Robinson is the last guy that's really in the battle. I think Jalen Graham is probably on the outside looking in. I think Stone Blanton is on the outside looking in. And all you have to do is look at those guys' snap numbers to find out that those guys are just not getting as many opportunities now that they got in week 1. So the 49ers are starting to hone in on who their linebackers are going to be. But Nick Martin and Chaz Surratt, 2 hyper-athletic guys, and then Tatum Bethune, the instincts, I think really elevated their game. And I think the linebacker room for the 49ers is looking pretty good. Now let's talk about a couple of defensive backs. Chase Lucas, of course, have to mention him. Phenomenal. Chase Lucas continues to elevate his game and just be a consistent playmaker. The guy comes up with big plays when you need it, whether it's the interception earlier in the game, or the way he finished off this game with a huge sack to start off that last drive and kind of put the Raiders behind the 8 ball in their comeback attempt. You just see Chase Lucas executing when he's called upon to execute. And I think that's really big. And I think that Chase Lucas, I don't think it's a lock. I don't want to say lock that he makes his 53-man roster. I think that's a little bit tough to say right now with all the moving parts and how, teams are constructed. But I think that that's one element. And then you look at what he could do, as a part of this team, and you see the versatility of him helping on special teams, playing nickel. So I don't think this thing is done yet, but I think Chase Lucas has done so much in week 1 and week 2 that he's putting everyone on notice that he should make this 53-man roster. And I will say this, if he does not make the 49ers 53-man roster, he's going to land on somebody's 53-man roster. So Chase Lucas has done what every guy tries to do, and he has proven that he is an NFL caliber player and needs to be on somebody's opening day roster, whether that's with the 49ers or with one of those other 31 teams. That's to be determined. Now, I think the 49ers want to keep him. I think that they're very high on him. And so I do believe that he has probably, worked his way up into a role with this 49ers 53-man roster. It's just been too good, too consistent. And I think that's what the 49ers are looking for, especially with some of the question marks, the injury to Upton Stout, Trey Brown dealing with a heel injury. Those are the other 2 guys really in the mix for that nickel corner spot. So I think they feel comfortable with Chase Lucas, and I think he's got a good shot of being on this team. And then Saron Neal. And we haven't really talked about Saron Neal a lot. Mostly brought in for special teams. 49ers have fooled around with a couple of different positions for him. He came in as a corner, but they play him and Derek Canteen in 2 different roles. They have played him at, safety as well. And I think they're trying to find some way to get him on the roster because he's so good at special teams. I thought he had a good performance at corner. I did. I thought that he stepped up and made some plays. He was playing physical. He was playing fast. And that's what he's got to do. He's got to get on people's radar to be able to make this 53-man roster. I think he's been a little bit of an afterthought, hasn't really made plays, but when he was given the opportunity in this game versus the Raiders, he really did. He made a lot of big plays, and I thought that was huge for the 49ers. So I've got Saron Neal entering the mix. I think this Chargers game is going to be very, very important for him. I think he's going to have a good game. And it's not just defensively, but special teams as well. Some things are going to have to go the right way for Saron Neal to be able to make this football team. But he's very valued. Brad Boyer's going to value him a lot. And if he can prove that he's a guy that needs to be on this defense, they'll keep him. So I think him and Chase Lucas are interesting guys who kind of put themselves right there. I think Lucas is definitely more on the inside than the outside. And I think Saron Neal's right there on the fringe. So it's going to be interesting, this cornerback room and how it's built, because there could be some good cornerbacks and some young guys that you were hoping you could count on that could potentially not make this team. Now, next up, I got to give some flowers to Kalia Davis. Coming into the preseason, I had talked about, I thought he looked good, over the last couple weeks of training camp before the preseason started. And, he was impressive when I was there. There was a little bit of pushback, and it's, rightly so, because of the injury concerns and some of the things he's just not been able to stay on the field. He has had the best training camp of his career. He's had the best preseason of his career. And he continued to build upon that great performance he had in week 1 against the Denver Broncos in this game versus the Raiders. Now, the stat sheet is not going to be filled up with a bunch of plays that he made. But what it is going to show on the film is a bunch of plays he made that helped other people be better. I think Kalia Davis has solidified himself as a starting defensive tackle for the 49ers. I think as long as Jordan Elliott is healthy, that against the Seattle Seahawks, Jordan Elliott and Kalia Davis are going to be your starting defensive tackles. And that's crazy to think. We're talking about him being a fringe roster player coming into training camp, and he has just went out there and took the bull by the horns and took the position. And this is how you win in the NFL. You go out and you prove, hey, I may not have done it in the past. I had some injury things, but now I'm right. And now I'm going to go out there and prove that I can be a consistent defensive tackle in the NFL. And I think Kalia Davis has done that. So he has continued to elevate his game. He's continued to be consistent. And I like what I'm seeing from Kalia Davis. So I think he's going to make this roster. I think he's going to start. And that's crazy to say. Now, a few guys I wanted to mention, because I think it's interesting when you're talking about roster development, is there was 3 veterans that made plays in this game that I think are all in the running to make this football team, but which ones are going to make it is going to be interesting. And that's the 3 veteran wide receivers, not named Jauan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall is phenomenal, by the way, or Demarcus Robinson. But Russell Gage, Isaiah Hodgins, and Robbie Chosen, I thought all elevated their game from week 1. And, I get it. They're going against a different secondary. The Denver Broncos secondary is definitely better. But I thought that there was more consistency in the route running. I felt like these guys were presenting a very good target for whoever the quarterback was, whether that was Brock or Mac Jones or Carter Bradley, who also elevated his game. Carter Bradley jumped huge in people's opinions from week 1 to week 2. And it's amazing what happens when you feel more confident in the offense, that your play will kind of show that. But he got some open receivers too. They were getting open. And I think the 49ers have some decisions to make. They're obviously not going to keep all 3. I think that would be very difficult when you're talking about the roster. Jauan Jennings will definitely be on the opening 53-man roster. Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, I think still will. Hopefully he'll play against the Chargers. That will be interesting. And then Jordan Watkins. So if you keep 6 wide receivers, you can only keep 2 of these 3 guys. That's why I don't think all 3 of them are going to make it. But I think all 3 put themselves in position to make the team. Robbie Chosen, 5 catches, 95 yards. He did drop the big touchdown throw from Carter Bradley. That would have been a big play. Isaiah Hodgins has just looked consistent as a chain mover. Same with Russell Gage. I think Russell Gage has done a pretty good job as far as route running and getting open. So that's going to be interesting. But I thought all 3 were stock up 49ers and kind of made this thing a little bit more interesting when it comes to the wide receiver room. And the 49ers needed depth, and these guys are adding depth at wide receiver. Now, not enough that the 49ers weren't still looking out on the open market, and a trade came across where they tried to get John Mechie from the Houston Texans, and of course they got outbid by the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's headed that direction. But it did illustrate the 49ers' willingness to still look around and improve this wide receiver position. So there are no guarantees with wide receiver, especially with some of the injuries and some of the suspension concerns. So we'll keep our eyes out, see what the 49ers do, whether that's another trade, they watch the waiver wire. Things can definitely change. But I thought, at least for this matchup, that the 3 veteran guys did a really good job. Let me know who you thought the stock up 49ers were in the comment section down below. Really appreciate it. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating if you feel like I deserve it. And I appreciate everyone that's been doing that. It really means a lot. And of course, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go check it out. They got all the player props, all the standard betting, everything you want at FanDuel. Go check it out today. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.